What if there was a safe space for you to explore artificial intelligence? What if there was a team of friendly professionals waiting to help you examine what you can do with AI in your courses? Welcome to the world of what if.
Good morning, COSI. Good morning, FAU. Good morning, those of you who are in the room with us and those joining online. My name is Lisa McDonald. I am an instructional design assistant here at COSI. And what I would like to talk to you today is the CRAFT framework for prompting generative AI. I find the expression prompt engineering very intimidating because I am not a software engineer. And what I'm going to share with you today is less of a software application and more of a mindset shift. So today, what I will talk about in the first part, we will explore together what is craft and why does it matter. In the second part, we will experiment together. We will build a prompt and we will try it across a couple of different Gen AI platforms. And then finally, we'll evaluate by comparing responses and sharing some insights. But first, a little bit of background about me. I don't know if you are familiar with this quote from Wayne Dyer, but it really struck me as this presentation started to come together. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So for me, when ChatGPT was first released, we're coming up on 3 years now, I was taking an online course. And I got stuck in something, so I joined a synchronous online office hours with the professor, and I asked a question about, honestly, I can't even remember what the question was. I know that it was about something to do with coding. And the first thing the professor did was share his screen, open up ChatGPT, type my question word for word into the prompt area, and then said, show me 3 different ways of explaining the answer to this question. And I was floored because I had been avoiding generative AI up until that point, or avoiding ChatGPT, because in my head, all that was for cheating. So to have a professor use it was mind-blowing to me. But he said, look at those 3 responses and tell me which one works for you and makes sense for how you think. Like I said, I don't remember what the question was, so I don't remember what the answers were. But it was the mindset shift for me of, wait a minute, it's not just for cheating. It can be used for better learning and better teaching. Also, as we go through the presentation, you'll notice this sort of bizarre looking raft, and that is because the raft framework is a real thing, but I adjusted it a little bit, and it is now a crafty raft, and we will get to that next. So we're going to explore the CRAFT framework as a guide for structuring Gen AI prompts. At the beginning of using generative AI for me, I would just go to that field and I would type in it like I was Google searching, which is not really the right way to be using generative AI. It's a different tool than Google. In fact, we use Google as a verb now because it is so prevalent. But generative AI it works a little bit differently. So 2 weeks ago, you may remember that my co-host Miguel did a presentation on making a mind map. And his proposal was that we can use Monica mind mapping. Monica is just the name of the tool to address the blank page syndrome. Sometimes we know we want to speak about something, talk about something, learn about something, but we don't really know where to start. Monica is a great tool because Monica leverages several different generative AI platforms at the same time. And then it will produce a mind map of those responses, kind of collect the things that are similar and offer those to you as a framework for starting to get thinking about it. So on Miguel's recommendation, I just went to Monica and I said, okay, tell me how to write an effective prompt in generative AI. And Monica said, well, be clear and specific, provide context, use examples if possible, ask open-ended questions, specify the format, iterate and refine, and limit the scope if necessary. And I thought, okay, those things are helpful, as I start to think about what am I writing when I write inside that text box with generative AI. But I still wasn't satisfied. So now I went to ChatGPT and I said, okay, can you please give me a simple template for prompting generative AI? And it said, sure, here you go. You are a role. Your primary purpose is to objective. Your task is to specific action or goal. The context is background information. The audience is target audience. The purpose, why this task matters, and specific requirements or constraints. This was hugely intimidating to me. I thought, I'm never going to remember all of that in order to write a prompt. But what the important shift for me came next. When I was teaching in K-12, there was this thing called a raft paper. And a raft paper is a way of thinking about an assignment as a K-12 teacher. You're asking your students to take on a particular role, to speak to a particular audience, usually in a particular format, and to accomplish a particular task. And this is a strategy that comes from Project Chris, I believe, student learning strategies, but certainly you can visit Project Chris on your own if you like. But this really became kind of a crowbar or a pry bar for me to think about, okay, so role is the same. Audience, yep, that's over there. Format, it's kind of implied. And then the task itself is also in there. So, hey, I can remember this. So what would a raft model look like in a classroom? I taught in high school, and I imagine a scenario where I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet, for example. So what I might do with this as an instructor is ask my students, take on the role of Juliet. You're going to write for your parents, Lord and Lady Capulet. You're going to write an email, which now takes the context out of Shakespearean times into more modern times. And perhaps we could even leverage that further, come even more modern, and ask the students, instead of an email message, make a TikTok short for your parents. But I digress. The task that I would give the students is to persuade them to allow you to make your own choice about marriage. So already in the instructions, I'm asking the students to take on the worldview of Juliet. And that, as an instructor, gives a student a handle, if you will, on what they're being asked to do. And it becomes a little bit easier than write an analysis of, Act 3, Scene 2. That's dry. But if we give them a purpose, it becomes a little bit easier. On the right side, you can just see how those instructions might be written in plain English. But I think that you can see the value, the benefit of, okay, here's the idea. This is how this might work. So now I'm thinking ChatGPT and other generative AI tools are now my student. I'm the one that's going to give them the raft format. But I realized for ChatGPT, it also needs context. Are we talking about higher education? Are we talking about business? Are we talking about science? Are we talking about the humanities? That's going to matter a lot. And the more information I can give generative AI, the better the responses I will get. But it's still enough that I can remember, okay, when I go into ChatGPT, I need to give it CRAFT. And if I can remember context, role, audience, format, and task, I'm probably going to get a decent response. And secret, if you forget what one of those is, it's okay. It's still probably going to work pretty well. I would say the most important one is going to be task, and we can talk about that in just a moment. So now we are going to work together to experiment. Before I click to the next slide, does anybody have any questions in person or online at this point before we dive in? Can a quote be a prompt? Absolutely. Absolutely. It depends, how much information you give it is going to depend on what you get. So if you just went to ChatGPT and you told it to be or not to be, it's probably going to interpret that in a particular way and then give you some, maybe it'll give you the rest of the speech. Or maybe it'll say, oh, maybe you wanted to know more about this. And the other thing that's great about Gen AI is that when it gets done with its response, it almost always asks you a prompting question. Can I give you a slideshow to go with that? Can I offer you a bulleted list of other famous speeches by Shakespeare? So, great question. Thank you for that. So, let's work together and let's build a craft prompt. So, I'm thinking maybe we can ask our online audience to look at the context, the role, and the audience, and maybe the first 3 responses that get popped into the chat. And then those of you in the room, if you could take a look at the format and the task, pick one from that list, and we'll build a little Frankenstein together. So, down here, I have a little cheat sheet for myself. I'm going to jump over to ChatGPT. And I'd like to point out that I am not currently signed in, so ChatGPT does not have any context for this conversation. But I believe that we are in a creative context. We are looking for a thought partner. We're speaking to an audience of novices. We're looking for a formal speech, which will be an interesting format for novices, and we're trying to critique. It's always harder to type when you know you're being watched. Hamlet's speech, and okay, can you correct that for me? All right, I won't have to type it again because I will be able to copy and paste. But with 0 previous context, here's a formal speech that critiques Hamlet's famous to be or not to be soliloquy. So using that framework, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering here today as we embark on a thoughtful exploration of one of the most iconic passages in the history of literature, Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy. So you can see it has already generated so quickly the first paragraph of this speech. Now, because this is generative AI, am I just going to say, okay, great, that's perfect, copy, paste it into whatever, and publish? Of course not. We're going to carefully read it before we do anything with it. And then from there, we can start to tweak it in whatever direction we like. But you can see, if I scroll down, it's proposing that we're going to consider the form, the function, and the flaws in the speech. It claims that Hamlet does more than contemplate life and death. He opens a door into the very nature of human suffering and choice. I'm not sure this is really for novices at this point, but we did ask for kind of a strange scenario by saying we want a creative formal letter for an audience of novices. So I just wanted to show you it is certainly in the format of a formal letter, but I just wanted to show you that it would generate that. And I'm going to do the same thing by posting exactly the same prompt with no further context into Gemini and see what it has to say. I think it's actually not. It just shrinks it. Oh, you're right. Thank you for correcting my error. Copy. Try again. User error. Okay. Explaining craft. Got it. Thank you. Yep. So it broke down for me. So I would have to do a little bit more work with Gemini to get the kind of response that I want. But remember, I gave it a very bare bones prompt. And if I were really trying to work with it, I probably would have said something a little bit more like, hey, can you help me write a speech for this audience? But in the interest of time, I'm going to jump over to Perplexity. I'm going to give it the same bare bones prompt and see what it gives. And you'll notice Perplexity as a different tool, what it's going to do first is it goes straight to the internet and starts looking for resources that talk about Hamlet's to be or not to be speech. So we can already tell, looking at this, okay, maybe Vanderbilt University, maybe there's something academically viable about this article. So maybe I have a little bit more trust in whatever the response that was generated is. So it's going to divide into interesting. Even though I told it roll, it gave me register instead of roll. Okay. But that's interesting. Also, what is the register of Shakespeare's English? All right. I don't have a problem with that. But again, I could tweak the response that I'm getting from Perplexity by clarifying my question, right? The answer you get is always dependent on the question that you asked. So one last thing I'm going to do is jump into Claude. And the reason Claude is in a different place is because Claude won't let me play unless I'm logged in. So this is the only of those websites that I've been logged into my own account. So Claude has some notion of our previous conversations. And it's offering a critical examination of Hamlet's to be or not to be soliloquy, understanding Shakespeare's masterpiece of existential inquiry, delivered as a formal address to these poor novices who are like, what is a soliloquy? What is existential inquiry? So again, just pointing out that, and then there's quite a hefty response, and I don't want to read all of it to you. I think the value of this for me is that I can give it, whichever Gen AI tool I use, I can give it a very small, bare bones prompt and then refine the kinds of responses I'm getting from it as I get clearer about what I'm looking for. So we left off there. I'm going to pause once more for any questions that might be developing online or in the room. Yes.
Ravi asked, in your experience, which tool generates the better prompts?
It depends on the question. It's kind of like cars come in different makes and models. So which car is the best? Well, are you talking about sports cars? Are you talking about off-road vehicles? Are you talking about heavy lifting? So it really depends, and it depends on the question. Yes.
He also asked, why don't we use GAI to create the prompt?
Absolutely, that is a great suggestion, and I have done that. The only reason that I haven't done that today is because I'd really like to show you the next chunk. But since you asked, I'm sure we've got a minute. Let me jump back into one of those tools. And I think I'll choose Hamlet's, the Claude tool. So I'm just typing in, please use the following information to write an effective prompt for Gen AI. And then I hope I still have great question. So it has now said, you're serving as a creative thought partner To help novices understand literary criticism, your task is to write a formal speech that critically analyzes Hamlet's famous speech. More information. So you can see same. So I'm hoping that craft starts to become something you're curious to play with. And when we get into playtime, which is coming right up, I offer the same roles to choose from. Perhaps you've thought of other ones that you'd like to try in playing with AI. If you feel like, okay, I get that, but what else can I use it for? Feel free to ask Gen AI the same question relevant to your own context across different platforms so you can compare the responses. Like the question that was asked, which platform is best? Depends on the question and it depends on the day. It can even depend on what time of the day. Ask Gen AI to explain something that you already know really well so that you can evaluate the validity of that response. Maybe it's not a great response. Maybe it makes you see things from a new perspective, so you can ask Gen AI to challenge your own thinking. Change my mind. I think this, argue against it. The devil's advocate position that we talked about. And then finally, for educators, for those instructors who might be here, maybe you can ask ChatGPT or one of the other Gen AI tools to generate a rubric for you. I'm sure that you have an idea of those questions that you have asked over and over again, and you know where students struggle for a great response. So maybe you can simulate, okay, what's an emerging response from a student? What's an exemplary response from a student? You can kind of spitball those both into generative AI and then ask ChatGPT again, or the other tool that you're using. ChatGPT is going the way of Google. It's becoming the verb that represents a lot of other things. But what I'm trying to say is that you can ask it, okay, I really liked this version. I thought this one could use a little strengthening, and so it gives you the opportunity to create a rubric based on a typical maybe C-level response versus a typical maybe A-level response. So I hope that that is helpful to you. The resources are really just the 4 different websites that I visited, plus Monica. And the raft comes from Project Chris, Creating Independence Through Student-Owned Strategies.